What in God's name is going on in here? Evelyn Whitmore's voice tore through the silence like a whip. The nursery lights glared down on a scene so wrong her mind refused to register it at first. Marcus Reed, the family's young valet, was on the floor, his wrists bound with torn linen, his mouth covered with silver tape. Her twin children were in their crib, faces red and wet from crying, small fists trembling as they reached for her. For one suspended heartbeat, Evelyn couldn't move. The air was thick with baby powder and fear, the curtains motionless in the heavy Charleston heat. "Oh, my Lord," she whispered, rushing forward, heels slipping on the polished wood. She knelt beside Marcus, her manicured fingers fumbling with the tape at his mouth. When it came loose, his words tumbled out in gasps. "Ma'am, please, I only asked for an hour. My boy's in the hospital. He can't breathe without me. I swear I meant no harm." His voice cracked, a mix of panic and humiliation. Evelyn's eyes widened. The linen around his wrists was tight enough to draw blood. "Who did this to you?" she demanded. Before he could answer, a calm, composed voice came from the doorway. "I did." Harrison Whitmore leaned against the doorframe, sleeves rolled up, as if the whole scene were some minor inconvenience. He was shouting, "Eve, frightened the children half to death. I told the staff to restrain him until I got home." Evelyn rose slowly, the color draining from her face. "Restrain him?" she repeated. "He's a human being, not an animal." Harrison's expression didn't change. He lost control. "Because his child's dying, Harrison. That's not our concern," he said evenly. "Our children are." His tone was low, authoritative, the same tone he used with board members and waiters alike. It made her stomach turn. "You can't do this," she whispered. "You can't treat people this way." "You've grown sentimental," he said. "That's the problem. You confuse kindness with weakness. And you confuse cruelty with leadership," she shot back. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Evelyn, let me remind you, this house runs because of discipline, not emotions. If you undermine that—" What?" she cut in. "If I act like a decent human being?" He exhaled sharply, folding his arms. "If you walk out with him, Eve, don't come back." The words hit like a slap. She looked at Marcus, trembling on the floor, then at her crying babies, and finally back at the man she'd once sworn to love. Something inside her broke clean in two. "Then I won't," she said. She crouched again, cutting the last knot from Marcus's wrists with a letter opener from the desk. His skin was raw, red, trembling. "Can you stand?" He nodded, unsteady. "We're leaving," she said. Harrison's eyes flashed. "You're making a mistake." "No," she said softly. "I'm correcting one." She helped Marcus to his feet. He stumbled, catching himself on the crib. The twins cried louder as Evelyn tucked the blanket around them. "Mommy will be back soon," she whispered, kissing each damp forehead. Then she turned toward the door. Harrison moved aside, saying nothing, his silence more poisonous than words. Outside, the night pressed in, humid and close. The cicadas were loud, the magnolia trees heavy with scent. Evelyn's navy blue Mercedes sat waiting under the porch light, its chrome glinting faintly. She guided Marcus into the passenger seat. He winced as he sat, his hands shaking. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "He'll make you pay." "Let him try," she said, starting the engine. The drive to street? Luke's hospital was 15 minutes of pure silence, save for the soft hum of tires over asphalt and the faint strains of a gospel station on the radio. The streets were empty, Charleston asleep under its old oaks and ghosts of history. Evelyn's reflection in the windshield looked like a stranger, pale, eyes fierce, hair wild around her shoulders. At the hospital, she marched Marcus through the sliding doors. The nurses stared but said nothing. She'd been on enough charity boards to know how to make things happen quickly. Within minutes, Marcus was in an exam room, a doctor cleaning his wrists. "You can go, ma'am," Marcus said quietly, eyes down. "You've done enough." "Enough?" she echoed, folding her arms. "Marcus, what happened tonight wasn't enough. It was wrong." He swallowed hard. "He'll fire me." "He already did," she said. "So let's make it worth the trouble." A faint, trembling smile touched his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "You didn't have to." "Someone had to," she said simply. Later, as she drove home, the city lights reflected on the windshield like shards of glass. The Whitmore estate loomed ahead, elegant and cold, its tall windows glowing faintly in the dark. When she stepped inside, the air felt different still, sterile, as if the walls themselves disapproved. Harrison was nowhere to be seen. She set her keys on the table, listening to the grandfather clock ticking in the hall. Upstairs, the twins were asleep again. Evelyn paused by the nursery door, hand resting on the frame. The soft glow of the nightlight fell across the floorboards, illuminating the torn sheet still lying in a heap where Marcus had been bound. She picked it up slowly, feeling its roughness between her fingers. A mother's instinct told her this night wasn't an accident. It was a warning. Something darker lived beneath the quiet elegance of their home, something she'd ignored for far too long. She looked around the nursery, the rocking chair she'd chosen, the bookshelf with pastel spines, the old teddy bear slumped against the wall. Everything looked the same, yet nothing did. Her father's words drifted back from memory, steady and sure. When you see wrong, Evelyn, you don't wait for someone braver. You do the right thing, even if your hands shake. Her hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from fury, from resolve. Evelyn turned off the light, the nursery sinking into shadows. Downstairs, the clock struck 10. She stood alone in the hallway, the sound echoing through the emptiness, and whispered to herself, "This house doesn't own me anymore." Then, with a slow breath that steadied her heart, Evelyn Whitmore, wife, mother, woman of Charleston society, took her first quiet step toward justice. The next morning broke with the kind of soft Charleston sunlight that usually promised peace, but to Evelyn Whitmore, it felt like light cast on a crime scene. She hadn't slept. She'd watched dawn creep across the nursery walls while the twins stirred in their cribs, murmuring half-dreams. When the housekeeper arrived at 7, Evelyn was still in her robe, standing at the kitchen counter, coffee gone cold in her hand. "Good morning, ma'am," the woman said cautiously, eyes darting toward the staircase. Evelyn nodded absently. "Where's Mr. Whitmore?" "He left early, ma'am. Said he'd be at the club for breakfast." The club, of course, the refuge for men who never wanted to face the women they'd wronged. Evelyn set down her cup and walked into the living room, the heels of her slippers whispering against the Persian rug. The house was immaculate, too immaculate. Someone had already cleaned the nursery floor, polished the silver crib rails, folded the blankets. There was no trace of what had happened the night before, except for the memory pulsing in her temples. At 9, she found Harrison in his study, sleeves rolled up, talking on the phone. His voice was smooth, businesslike. "No, I'm not concerned. The staff handled it. Yes, he's gone." He looked up and saw her in the doorway. "I'll call you back," he said flatly, and hung up. "You had him fired," she said, her voice trembling not from weakness, but from control. "You didn't even ask what happened." Harrison leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I didn't have to." He crossed a line. By asking to see his child? By shouting at me in my own home. "He was terrified," she snapped. "You ordered him tied up. You're exaggerating." His tone was calm, almost clinical. "He was restrained. There's a difference. Not to the man bleeding on our nursery floor." He stood slowly, buttoning his cufflinks. "Eve, you're exhausted. You've been away. You're emotional. Don't you dare call me emotional." Her voice shook now, but there was steel underneath. "You humiliated that man, and for what? To prove you could?" "You're overreacting," he said, walking past her, "and you're losing perspective." "Perspective?" she repeated, following him down the hall. "You mean obedience." He turned at the door, his smile cold. "Whatever you call it, it's what keeps this family together." She stared after him as he left, the sound of the front door closing echoing through the house like a verdict. All morning, Evelyn moved through the rooms like a ghost. The twins played on the floor, stacking blocks, their laughter high and pure, but every time she looked at them, she saw the flash of silver tape, the bruises on Marcus's wrists. She tried to shake it, but the image clung to her. By noon, she found herself standing at the long dining table, staring at the polished wood. It had been set for lunch, as if nothing had happened. She picked up one of Harrison's wine glasses and held it up to the light. The crystal shimmered, catching a single ray of sunlight. Perfect, untouched. She slammed it down. The sharp crack of breaking glass echoed, startling the twins upstairs. Her hands trembled, tiny cuts blooming on her palms. She didn't notice the pain. The housekeeper rushed in, gasping, "Ma'am, are you all right?" Evelyn looked at her and smiled faintly. "Yes, I'm fine. I just dropped something I didn't need anymore." That afternoon, she called the hospital. Marcus had been discharged, stable. Relief and guilt tangled in her chest. She wanted to visit, to make sure he was safe, but she knew Harrison would notice. Instead, she wrote a check to the hospital foundation, anonymous, substantial, enough to cover his bills for months. A small gesture in a war she was only beginning to understand. When evening fell, the house felt too big, too quiet again. She poured herself a glass of red wine and sat on the porch, watching the light fade over the marsh. Charleston's air carried that slow, southern melancholy cicadas, humming, the smell of salt and gardenias drifting from the yard. The twins slept upstairs, a baby monitor beside her chair flickering with soft static. She thought about leaving, packing a few bags, taking the children, disappearing to her sister's cabin in Asheville. But she knew Harrison. He would come after her, not out of love, but pride. The Whitmore name didn't tolerate scandal. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You did right last night. Thank you." She stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "Take care of your son." She assumed it was Marcus, though she couldn't be sure. She didn't ask how he got her number. Maybe kindness traveled in its own quiet way. Later, when she went upstairs, she found Harrison sitting on the edge of their bed, unbuttoning his shirt. "You didn't tell anyone about last night, did you?" he asked without looking up. "Should I have?" "No," he said. "It would ruin us." "Ruin you, you mean?" He looked up then, eyes cold and sharp. "Don't test me, Eve. You know how this town works. People talk. They twist things. You'd be the one they pity, not him." "Maybe pity isn't the worst thing to earn," she said softly. "At least it's human." He shook his head, a dry laugh escaping him. "You always did have a taste for lost causes. And you," she said, turning away, "always had a taste for control." That night, she lay awake long after Harrison's breathing settled into its steady rhythm. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. Her mind replayed Marcus's voice, broken and pleading. Her own voice, trembling but certain. "You can't do this." The words echoed like a vow. At 2 a.m, unable to stand the silence, she slipped out of bed and went to check on the twins. They slept peacefully, arms tangled around each other, the old teddy bear resting between them. She watched them for a while, something protective and fierce tightening in her chest. Then, softly, she picked up the bear. The stitching near the ear was slightly loose, her own clumsy repair months ago when one of the twins had pulled too hard. She ran her fingers over it, then set it back down carefully. The nursery was warm and still, the only sound the quiet breath of her children. But somewhere inside that calm, Evelyn felt the faint tremor of unease, like a chord struck deep in the walls. She whispered to the sleeping twins, "This house isn't safe anymore." She meant it. The next morning, when she passed Harrison in the hall, he didn't look at her. But she didn't need him to. Something between them had shifted. The air around him felt thinner, his authority brittle. And though he didn't see it yet, his control over her had cracked. Evelyn Whitmore was still in his house, but her loyalty had already left. The rain started before dawn, soft and steady, washing the Charleston streets in silver. Evelyn Whitmore sat at the kitchen window, her coffee untouched, eyes tracing the thin line of water running down the glass. The house was still. Harrison had left early again, another meeting at the club. She'd stopped asking which one. The twins were with the nanny upstairs, their laughter faint, distant, like a memory she couldn't quite hold on to. She felt suspended between guilt and resolve, fear, and the fragile calm that comes after a storm. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. For a second, she hesitated before answering. "Mrs. Whitmore?" The voice on the line was quiet, hesitant. "This is Marcus Reed." Evelyn's breath caught. "Marcus, are you all right?" "I'm fine, ma'am. The doctors released me yesterday. My boy's better too. They let me sit with him all night." A pause. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did." "You don't need to thank me, Marcus. I did what anyone with a conscience would do." "Not everyone would have risked it," he said softly. "Mr. Whitmore came to the hospital, said if I talked about what happened, he'd make sure I never found work in this city again." Evelyn closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I'm sorry. I didn't think he'd—" "It's not your fault, ma'am. I just thought you should know." "I do," she said quietly, "and I won't forget it." When she hung up, the coffee had gone cold again. She poured it out, rinsed the cup, and watched the water swirl down the sink. Her reflection in the window looked older than she remembered, tired, but sharp. That afternoon, she drove to St. Luke's Hospital under the pretense of donating to the children's wing. The receptionist recognized her instantly. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's an honor. Your husband's foundation." "Yes," Evelyn cut in gently. "He's very generous. But I'm here on my own today." The woman smiled politely, oblivious to the edge in Evelyn's tone, and pointed her toward room 214. Marcus was there, sitting by a small hospital bed. His son, Jalen, lay sleeping, a thin tube taped to his arm. The boy's face was delicate, peaceful. Marcus looked up, startled, when Evelyn appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Whitmore," he whispered, standing quickly. "You didn't have to come." "I wanted to," she said. She stepped closer, eyes softening. "He's beautiful." Marcus smiled faintly. "Toughest kid I know. The doctors say he's improving." "Good," she murmured. "That's good." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the quiet rhythm of the boy's breathing. Evelyn noticed the small stack of bills on the bedside table, corners bent, numbers scrawled in blue ink. "Hospital expenses?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, embarrassed. "They've been kind, but—" She reached into her purse and set an envelope beside the bills. "Consider it taken care of." Marcus shook his head. "I can't accept that." "You can," she said softly, "and you will. It's not charity, it's fairness." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, his voice rough. "You're a good woman, Mrs. Whitmore." She almost laughed at that. "I don't know about good," she said, "but I'm trying to be better than yesterday." The words surprised even her. On her drive home, the sky had cleared, the rain giving way to that late afternoon Charleston glow, where everything looked dipped in gold. But her thoughts were storming still. She kept hearing Marcus's voice. "He said he'd ruin me if I talked." Harrison's threats were not idle. He'd built an empire on intimidation, business partners, servants, even her. She realized now how many times she'd chosen silence because it was easier. That night, Harrison returned home at 10, smelling faintly of whiskey and expensive cologne. Evelyn sat in the parlor, the soft glow of a single lamp painting her face in amber light. He loosened his tie, glancing at her. "You're still up." "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About Marcus." His eyes narrowed. "You're not still on that, are you?" "He called me." "He what?" The mask of composure cracked. "He called to thank me," she said evenly. "And to tell me you threatened him. Because he's dangerous, Eve, don't you see? Men like him." "Stop," she said, rising from the couch. "Just stop. Men like him? You mean decent men who love their children? Hard-working men who trust the wrong people? You don't know him. And you do?" Her voice was calm, deadly quiet. "You tied him up, Harrison. You humiliated him. In front of our children." He scoffed, reaching for the decanter. "This is exactly why I said you were too emotional to handle." "Say that word again," she warned. He stopped, hand hovering over the glass. "I'm serious," she said. "If you ever call me emotional again, I'll remind you who in this house actually feels something." For a moment, they stared at each other, the air between them sharp as glass. Then he laughed softly, shaking his head. "You've changed." "No," she said. "I've woken up." She turned to leave, but he called after her. "You think you're righteous? You'll regret this, Eve. This house, this life, it's built on order. Without that, everything falls apart." She didn't turn around. Maybe it should. Upstairs, she checked on the twins again. They slept soundly, their soft breath steady, the old teddy bear nestled between them. She touched its worn fur and smiled sadly. "You don't even know what world you're in," she whispered. "But maybe one day you'll live in a better one." Later, she lay awake in bed, the sheets cool and unfamiliar beside her. Harrison slept in the guest room now, his choice, not hers. The house creaked softly around her, an old southern mansion with too many secrets built into its bones. She thought of her father again, of the lessons he'd taught her in their tiny farmhouse in Georgia. Do what's right, even when no one's watching. Especially then. The words played in her mind as the night deepened. Around 2, she got up, unable to rest. She walked barefoot to the nursery, opened the window, and let the humid air spill in. The street outside was quiet, lamplight glowing against the damp pavement. Somewhere far off, church bells marked the hour. Evelyn looked down at her sleeping children and whispered to herself, "You deserve better than this. So do I." The words weren't a promise yet, but they were a beginning. And as she stood there, the faint hum of the baby monitor filled the silence, a steady pulse of life in a house that no longer felt like home. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, painting the floors in clean, golden lines that could almost have passed for peace if not for the quiet tension that pulsed beneath them. Evelyn Whitmore stood at the breakfast table, staring at the untouched plate of poached eggs in front of her. The twins sat in their high chairs, cooing softly as the nanny spooned mashed peaches into their mouths. Across the room, the air felt heavy, too still, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Harrison came in late, phone in one hand, his cufflinks glinting in the light. "You're up early," he said, sliding into the seat opposite her. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. "I'm surprised you could." He didn't respond. He poured himself coffee, black and quick, the way he always did when he wanted to seem composed. "We need to talk about last night," she began carefully. "Marcus." He didn't look up. "That subject is closed. Not for me, it isn't." "Eve," he said, a warning laced through her name. "We've discussed this. You don't need to involve yourself any further." "Involve myself?" she repeated, leaning forward. "He worked for us. He lived under our roof. You made sure he left humiliated and penniless. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." Harrison stirred his coffee with a spoon, the sound soft but grating. "Pretend?" he said. "That's how people survive in this world. You think the other wives in this town don't look the other way? It's called civility." "No," she said, voice low. "It's called cowardice." He finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Watch your tone." "Or what?" she asked. "You'll tie me up too?" His hand tightened on the cup, porcelain cracking faintly under the pressure. For a second, she thought he might throw it. Instead, he set it down gently and stood. "You're becoming unrecognizable, Eve. I'm warning you, don't test how far my patience goes." He turned and left, the echo of his footsteps fading into the hall. Evelyn exhaled, realizing her hands were trembling. The nanny avoided her eyes, focusing on the children. "That'll be all for now, Marjorie," Evelyn said quietly. When the woman left, Evelyn lifted the twins from their chairs, holding each of them close. "It's going to be all right," she whispered, though the words felt like a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. Later that morning, she found herself walking through the house as if seeing it for the first time. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers sparkled, and the portraits of Harrison's ancestors, men in starched collars, women in stiff pearls, stared down at her with disapproval. She realized how little of herself lived here. Every room, every curtain, every piece of furniture had been chosen by him. The house was a reflection of Harrison's control, not their love. And yet, she thought, even paint cracks when the foundation shifts. In the afternoon, she visited her friend Claire Drummond for tea, one of those polite Charleston gatherings where the conversation was always sweet, never sincere. The women smiled, talked about charities and garden parties, but Evelyn felt detached, floating above the chatter like a ghost. When someone asked how Harrison was, she answered automatically, "Busy as always." Claire touched her hand. "You look pale, dear. Is everything all right?" Evelyn hesitated. She wanted to tell her the truth that her husband had turned their home into a quiet battlefield, but the words stuck in her throat. She forced a smile, just tired. The lie tasted bitter. Driving home, she realized how isolation creeps in quietly, the way ivy grows beautiful, slow, and suffocating. By evening, Harrison had returned, his mood as polished as his shoes. Over dinner, he talked about a potential business deal, a property development near Savannah. His tone was casual, but Evelyn could hear the edge beneath it, a test, a reminder of who controlled their world. "It'll be good for us," he said. "Another investment, another layer of security." "Security," she echoed. "You mean for you?" He glanced up, smiling thinly. "For all of us, Eve, you and the children included." She set down her fork. "Do you even hear yourself anymore?" He laughed softly, the sound devoid of humor. "You really should be careful what you say. People are listening." "Who?" she asked. "Your lawyers? Your staff?" He leaned back. "Everyone, my dear. This is Charleston. Secrets don't stay buried long. She looked at him, realizing he was right, but not in the way he thought. That night, she sat in the nursery again, long after the twins had fallen asleep. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, silver and cold. She picked up the teddy bear from between the cribs, smoothing its fur with her palm. Something about it comforted her, the small, ordinary weight of it, the way it had absorbed the warmth of her children. "You've seen it all, haven't you?" she whispered. "All the things we hide." The house creaked, settling into its bones. She thought about Marcus and Jalen, about the fear in Marcus's eyes, the humiliation he'd endured. She thought about the way Harrison had spoken to her, as if decency were a flaw. Her father's voice came to her again, steady and unyielding. "If you let wrong stand, it becomes the rule. If you fight it, you might lose. But if you stay silent, you've already lost." Evelyn set the teddy bear back down, tucking it between the twins. The stitching near its ear was still loose. She traced it with her finger and felt something beneath hard, metallic. Probably a piece of the sound mechanism, she thought absently. She would fix it tomorrow. The next morning she woke early, before dawn. The house was still asleep, but she could feel the weight of the day pressing against the windows. She stood by the mirror, brushing her hair, studying her reflection. There was a calmness there now, a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Harrison's control had been built on fear, hers, the staff's. Everyone's but fear had a shelf life. Once it expired, what remained was anger, and anger could be pure. When she came down to breakfast, Harrison was already at the table, reading the paper. He didn't look up when she entered. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied evenly. "I'll be going out later. Errands. Do you need the driver?" "No," she said. "I prefer to go alone." He gave a non-committal grunt and went back to his reading. As she poured her coffee, she thought, "Let him think I'm predictable. Let him think I've surrendered." But she hadn't. She was done surrendering. The cracks in their perfect home were spreading, invisible but unstoppable, and she no longer cared to hide them. Upstairs, her children's laughter floated through the hallway, pure, unguarded, real. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn smiled. It was small, but it was true, and it felt like the start of something unbreakable. The following week unfolded in uneasy quiet, the kind that hums beneath the surface of a well-kept home. To anyone on the outside, the Whitmore's life still appeared pristine. Harrison at his meetings, Evelyn at luncheons, the twins photographed for yet another society feature. But beneath the thin gloss of civility, the cracks in their marriage had turned into fault lines. Evelyn felt it every time she passed Harrison in the hallway, and he didn't meet her eyes. Every time the phone rang and he stepped into another room to answer. The air in the house had changed. It carried an undercurrent of suspicion, and she could almost smell it, metallic and sour, like rain before lightning. One afternoon, while Harrison was away and the children napped upstairs, Evelyn wandered through the house, drawn back toward the nursery without meaning to. It had become her place of reckoning, the room where everything she'd believed about her life had started to unravel. She stood in the doorway, watching the sunlight scatter across the floor in patches through the lace curtains. The twins' toys were scattered, a small army of innocence. She bent to pick up the teddy bear, brushing off a bit of dust from its fur. Its ear was still frayed where the stitching had come loose. She ran her fingers over it, almost absently, feeling again that tiny metallic piece inside. There was something strangely comforting about the bear's silent witness, this small, worn object that had been present through everything, yet said nothing. "You've seen more truth than anyone in this house," she whispered. The words startled her, as if she had spoken them for someone else to hear. From behind her, the floorboard creaked. She turned to find Marjorie, the nanny, standing uncertainly in the doorway. "Ma'am, I didn't mean to intrude," the woman said. "I just came to check the children's things." Evelyn smiled faintly, tucking the bear under her arm. "You didn't intrude. It's your job." Marjorie hesitated, lowering her voice. "If I may, ma'am, people are talking downstairs, about that night." Evelyn's chest tightened. "What about it?" "Just whispers, ma'am. The staff saying Mr. Whitmore was right to do what he did. That you're being too soft." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Thank you for telling me, Marjorie. That'll be all." When the woman left, Evelyn sat down in the old rocking chair and looked around the room. The nursery had once been her sanctuary, painted in soft colors and music box lullabies. Now, it felt like a courtroom, and every shadow carried an accusation. Later that evening, Harrison called from the road. "I'll be staying in Savannah for a few days," he said casually. "Business expansion. Don't wait up." "Business," she repeated, her tone even. "Of course." But when the call ended, she didn't set the phone down right away. She stared at it, her reflection faint in the dark glass. There had been a woman's laughter in the background light. Careless, familiar. She'd heard it before, though she couldn't yet place it. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs, barefoot, and stood by the living room window. Outside, the garden was bathed in moonlight, the Spanish moss swaying softly from the oaks. Everything looked peaceful, but inside, her thoughts churned. She remembered the way Harrison had spoken to her over dinner the night before, measured, polite, almost rehearsed. The way he'd smiled without warmth, the way he'd called her Eve, like it was a formality, not an intimacy. She thought again of the laughter on the phone, of the rumors that always seemed to circle around the club he frequented. It wasn't anger that gripped her then. It was clarity. Something had shifted permanently. The man she had once defended in public, the man she'd built a life beside, was no longer hiding his contempt. And worse, she'd stopped being afraid of it. The next day, while the twins played on the nursery floor, Evelyn made a call of her own to Claire Drummond's husband, who happened to serve on the same charity board as Harrison. "Oh, Evelyn," he said, jovial and unsuspecting, "didn't you know? Harrison's not in Savannah. He's been attending those fundraising galas with that young woman, what's her name, Sophie Lane. Lovely girl, really, quite the pair." Evelyn's hand tightened around the phone. "Yes," she said quietly, "quite the pair." When she hung up, she sat perfectly still, staring at the teddy bear lying between her children. Her mind raced not with rage, but with purpose. The infidelity didn't surprise her. It confirmed what she'd felt for months. But the betrayal was still sharp, because it wasn't just about love, it was about power. Harrison didn't want a wife. He wanted an accessory. And when she had stopped playing her part, he'd turned to someone younger, easier to control. That evening, as she tucked the twins into bed, she caught her reflection in the mirror above the dresser. Her eyes looked different now, colder, yes, but also clearer. Behind her, the teddy bear sat upright in its usual spot, one small button eye gleaming in the lamplight. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, she leaned closer to it. "You were here that night," she whispered. "You saw it all." Her voice trembled slightly. Maybe that's what it takes to survive in this house, keeping quiet, pretending not to see. But she was done pretending. The next morning, Harrison's assistant called the house to confirm travel arrangements for Mr. Whitmore and Miss Lane. Evelyn thanked her, polite and composed, her heart steady even as her stomach turned. She now knew the woman's name, and it felt like a match dropped in dry grass. When she ended the call, she went upstairs, opened the closet in the nursery, and took down a small sewing kit. Sitting in the rocking chair, she picked up the teddy bear and began to examine the loose stitching again. The metallic sound inside was clearer this time, a small click when she pressed its side. She frowned, curious. Carefully, she worked the seam open, expecting to find a piece of wire or a broken sound box. What she found instead was something far more deliberate, a tiny recording device, its red light faint but unmistakable. For a moment, she just stared at it, her breath caught. It took a few seconds before she remembered. Months ago, during one of her long business trips, she'd asked a security technician to install discrete monitors around the nursery. A precaution, she'd told him, in case the nanny fell asleep or the babies cried while no one was nearby. She'd forgotten all about it. Until now, her pulse quickened as realization sank in. If the device had been recording continuously, then it had captured everything the night Marcus was tied up, the confrontation, Harrison's voice. Her fingers trembled as she held the bear, the weight of it suddenly heavy with truth. She leaned back in the chair, the faint creak of wood breaking the silence. "You've been keeping my secrets," she murmured to the bear, "and his sins." A slow, fierce calm filled her chest. For the first time since that terrible night, Evelyn Whitmore felt the scales begin to shift. Justice didn't roar, it whispered. And sometimes, she thought, it whispered through a child's toy. The discovery left Evelyn motionless for several minutes, sitting there in the dim nursery light, the tiny recorder resting on her palm like a forbidden truth. The faint red light blinked once, twice, then went still, as if it too was holding its breath. She closed her fingers around it, heart pounding in a rhythm she could feel in her throat. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked softly, and the sound made her realize how quiet everything had become. Even the air seemed to wait for her next move. She rose carefully, set the teddy bear back in its place between the twins, and crossed to her writing desk. Her hands trembled as she opened the small drawer where Harrison kept old USB adapters and spare batteries. The recorder had a tiny port, a model she recognized, one meant to sync to a laptop or computer. It took her 3 attempts before the cord fit properly. When the device connected, her laptop screen flickered to life, and a small folder appeared. The timestamp read 4 days ago, the night everything began. She hesitated only a second before double-clicking the file. The first thing she heard was the faint hum of the baby monitor, then Harrison's voice, calm, commanding, unmistakable. "Tie him," he said. The word was quiet but clear. Then Marcus's muffled protests, the twins' cries, the low edge in Harrison's tone as he ordered the staff to make sure he stays down until I return. Evelyn's breath came shallow, her hand tightening on the mouse. Every sound hit her like a lash, the fear in Marcus's voice, the cold indifference in Harrison's. She fast-forwarded. Then came her own voice, breaking through the chaos. "What in God's name is going on in here?" The recording played out in sharp detail, the confrontation, the disbelief, the way Harrison dismissed her compassion as weakness. And finally his threat, "If you walk out with him, Eve, don't come back." She stopped the recording, her chest tight. It was all there. Proof. Every word, every cruelty, sealed inside a child's toy. For years, she had lived beneath his control, his charm in public, his quiet brutality in private. Now she had something he couldn't manipulate or erase. She sat in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on her. What she held in her hands wasn't just evidence, it was liberation. But liberation was dangerous. If she used it wrong, she'd lose everything. The house, her children, her safety. She could almost hear her father's voice again. "The truth isn't gentle, Evelyn. It burns before it purifies." Later that evening, when Harrison returned, she was waiting in the living room, the same place he'd once boasted to friends about his empire and reputation. He looked surprised to see her dressed so elegantly, pearls at her neck, a calmness in her eyes that unsettled him. "You look different," he said, setting down his briefcase. "Do I?" she asked softly. "I suppose I am. What's this about?" She smiled faintly, tilting her head. "A question for you. When you hurt someone, Harrison, do you ever think about what comes after? About what happens when the lie runs out of places to hide?" He frowned, his patience thinning. "I'm not in the mood for your dramatics tonight, Eve." "No," she said, standing. "You're never in the mood for truth." She turned toward the grand piano by the window, where her laptop sat open. She pressed a key, and the recording began to play. Harrison froze. His own voice filled the room, cold, commanding, irrefutable. "Tie him." His color drained as he turned to her. "What is this?" "Your voice," she said quietly, "and your choices." He took a step forward. "Where did you get that?" "From the only thing in this house that still tells the truth," she said, glancing toward the nursery upstairs. His expression hardened. "You've made a mistake, Eve." "No," she said evenly. "You did," repeatedly. He tried to compose himself, running a hand through his hair. "Let's think about this rationally. You don't want to destroy this family. The children, don't use them," she cut in. "Not again." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain had started outside, soft at first, then steady. Harrison's tone shifted, smooth again, the voice he used in boardrooms and interviews. "You won't win," he said. "Even if you think you can. The law, the media, our friends, they all see me as the pillar of this city. You? You'll look hysterical, vindictive. I'll make sure of it." She regarded him quietly, as if studying a specimen under glass. "You always mistake fear for power," she said. "It's your blind spot. Don't test me, Eve." "I already have." She walked past him, brushing his sleeve as she did. "You'll see soon enough." Upstairs, she sat on the edge of the twins' bed, their soft breaths steady in the dark. She placed the teddy bear back between them and whispered, "You've done your part." Her mind was clear now, sharper than it had been in years. She knew she couldn't confront Harrison directly again. It would only make him dangerous. But there were other ways to make truth travel. The next morning, while Harrison met with his attorney, she drove to the office of an old acquaintance, a woman named Margaret Klein, a retired journalist who once covered the Whitmore Foundation's charitable work. Margaret had a reputation for being quiet, methodical, and fearless. Evelyn had donated to her literacy programs years ago. They'd stayed in polite touch. When Evelyn arrived, Margaret greeted her with the cautious warmth reserved for old friends hiding new pain. "Evelyn Whitmore," she said. "You look like someone carrying a secret." "I am," Evelyn replied, sliding the small recorder across the desk. "And I think it's time someone else heard it." Margaret hesitated, eyes flicking to the device. "This isn't a casual visit, is it?" "No," Evelyn said softly. "It's a confession and a warning." When the recording ended 20 minutes later, Margaret sat back, silent, the rain tapping against her office window. "This could ruin him," she said finally. "Yes," Evelyn replied, "but it could also free others." Margaret looked at her, something like admiration flickering behind her glasses. "You realize what will happen when this goes public?" Evelyn nodded. "I do, but I've lived too long pretending justice would find its own way. Sometimes you have to lead it there." She left the recorder with Margaret, thanked her, and stepped back into the rain. As she walked toward her car, the first real breath she'd taken in months filled her lungs. The city looked different now, not softer, not kinder, but honest. When she returned home that night, the house was silent again, but no longer suffocating. She stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching the twins sleep, the teddy bear between them still and harmless once more. "It's almost over," she whispered. Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck midnight, each chime ringing like a countdown. Evelyn Whitmore, once the quiet wife in the grand Charleston home, smiled faintly in the dark. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of her husband's power. She was holding something stronger, his truth. By morning, the rain had cleared, leaving Charleston washed clean but heavy with humidity, the kind that made the air feel almost alive. Evelyn Whitmore stood by her bedroom window, the lace curtains brushing her wrist as she looked out over the garden. The magnolias glistened with dew. For a moment, it was hard to believe that somewhere in the city, Margaret Klein was likely preparing to release the recording that would unravel her husband's life. She felt both calm and frightened, like the stillness before a thunderclap. Downstairs, she heard the sound of the front door slamming. Harrison's voice carried up the staircase, sharp and commanding, speaking to someone on the phone. "Find out who leaked it. I want names before noon." Evelyn closed her eyes. The fire had started faster than she'd expected. She moved quietly through the hall, her bare feet silent on the carpet, and paused outside his study. He was pacing, his tie loosened, one hand clutching his phone. "Don't tell me it's being shared already," he snapped. "I don't care what publication it is. Shut it down." His tone lowered, a hiss between clenched teeth. "I built this city's trust, and no woman is going to destroy it with gossip." Evelyn felt a flicker of cold satisfaction. He still thought it was gossip. He didn't yet know the recording existed in full, unedited, undeniable. When she stepped into the room, he froze mid-sentence. "I'll call you back," he said, lowering the phone. His eyes narrowed. "You look awfully calm for someone whose husband is being publicly crucified." "You sound awfully guilty for someone who claims innocence," she replied. "What did you do, Evelyn?" His voice dropped to a low growl. "You think this will make you righteous? You think people will believe a woman like you over me?" "I think," she said evenly, "they'll believe their own ears." His jaw tightened, a vein pulsing near his temple. "You recorded me?" "Not intentionally," she said, "but maybe fate has a conscience." He stepped closer, the air between them taut. "Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything. The foundation, the company, our family. You destroyed it," she cut in. "I just stopped cleaning up after you." For a moment, he looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger, and in a way he was. The woman who once smoothed over his temper, who stayed silent for peace, was gone. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, his voice soft, almost pleading. "Evelyn, listen to me. I can fix this. I can make it disappear." "You can't," she said. "Not this time. Not with money. Not with threats." His expression shifted again, cold now, calculating. "You forget who you're dealing with. I built this life. and I can take it away just as easily." "Maybe you already have," she whispered. He stared at her a moment longer, then turned and left the room without another word. She stood there, heart pounding, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade. The house felt enormous around her, like an empty stage after a play's final act. For the rest of the morning, she stayed upstairs with the twins, reading to them softly, her voice steady even as her mind replayed every possible outcome. She'd known this would come his fury, his attempts to claw back control, but knowing didn't make it easier. Around noon, the first messages started coming in. Claire called, her voice trembling. "Evelyn, it's everywhere, the recording. They played it on the local news. People are calling it the Whitmore tape. They're saying it's from inside your house." "It is," Evelyn said quietly. "My nursery." There was silence on the other end. Then Claire whispered, "He'll come for you." "I know. Do you want me to send someone?" "No, this is mine to finish." She ended the call and set her phone down, her hands suddenly steady. The truth was out now. There was no going back. The afternoon passed in strange clarity. Harrison locked himself in his study for hours, making calls that grew louder and more desperate. Evelyn could hear snippets, lawyers, investors, associates' voices that once obeyed now, questioning, retreating. At one point, the front door opened and slammed shut. She thought he'd left for good. Instead, he returned 2 hours later, his face drawn, the arrogance stripped from him. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" he demanded, standing in the doorway of the nursery. "To the children?" She turned from the crib, her gaze level. "I've given them a chance to grow up in a house where lies aren't furniture." His mouth twisted. "You're delusional. They'll remember this. They'll hate you for it." "Maybe," she said, "but at least they'll know I didn't stay quiet." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head, muttering something under his breath. When he left, she exhaled slowly. The confrontation hadn't been explosive, no shouting, no broken glass, but it had cut deeper. Later that night, she went downstairs to make herself tea. The news anchor's voice drifted faintly from the living room television. "New allegations have surfaced against philanthropist and businessman Harrison Whitmore, following leaked audio recordings that suggest." She turned it off before the rest could play. The silence felt cleaner. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed softly as it heated, the small, ordinary sound grounding her. She realized she hadn't eaten all day. Her reflection in the dark window looked unfamiliar, tired but alive. When she turned, she saw Harrison standing in the doorway. His face was pale, eyes shadowed. "They're freezing the accounts," he said quietly. "The board's calling for my resignation. Everything's gone." She nodded. "That's what happens when truth finally gets air." He laughed, but it was hollow. "You think you've won, don't you?" "There's nothing to win," she said. "Only things to stop losing." He stepped closer. "You've ruined me." "No," she said softly. "You ruined yourself. I just stopped helping you hide it." For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. He just looked at her, the weight of his downfall pressing into his shoulders, and walked away without another word. When she finally went to bed, the house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, not the suffocating quiet of fear, but the stillness after a storm when everything broken lies visible. She lay awake, the sound of the twins breathing faintly through the monitor, and thought of how endings never really announced themselves. They arrive quietly, in the middle of ordinary nights. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling across the marshes like a promise. Evelyn closed her eyes and whispered, "Let it all fall." She wasn't praying for destruction anymore. She was praying for what comes after it, the rebuilding, the peace that only truth could buy. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a strange, bruised stillness. The Charleston sun rose heavy and orange, spilling light across the Whitmore estate like a quiet verdict. Evelyn stood barefoot on the veranda, the wood cool under her feet, her robe brushing against her ankles as she watched the city wake. She'd always loved mornings, their promise of renewal, but today it felt different. This morning didn't promise peace, it promised consequences. Behind her, the house stirred. She heard drawers opening, the thud of suitcases, Harrison's muffled curses. He was packing. She turned slowly, watching through the glass doors as he stormed across the bedroom, yanking shirts from hangers. For a brief second, she remembered their early years together, the laughter in New York, the first time he'd brought her flowers, the way he'd looked at her before ambition hardened him. That man was gone, replaced by one who measured everything by ownership, including her. When he noticed her reflection in the mirror, he didn't stop. "You got what you wanted," he said coldly. "Are you proud?" "I didn't want this," she replied. "I wanted honesty." "You destroyed a man for honesty," he snapped. "Congratulations." She walked into the room, her voice calm. "You destroyed yourself. The recording didn't make you cruel, Harrison, it just made people hear it." He slammed the suitcase shut. "Do you even understand what happens now? The foundation's gone, my name's in every paper, investors are cutting ties. They're calling me a monster." "Then stop acting like one," she said softly. For a moment, he looked at her, really looked, and in that silence, she almost saw the man she'd once known, the one who used to believe in something greater than control. But then his eyes hardened again. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "You and those children will have nothing. We'll have peace," she said. "That's something you never could give." He picked up the suitcase, brushing past her without another word. The front door slammed behind him, the echo rattling the old glass panes. Evelyn stood there, hands trembling slightly, the quiet swallowing her whole. It was done. The empire of Harrison Whitmore had fallen not with a scandal's roar, but with the soft exhale of inevitability. By noon, reporters had gathered outside the gates, their vans crowding the cobblestone street. Evelyn kept the blinds closed, the twins upstairs under the nanny's care. Claire called again, her voice hushed but urgent. "Evelyn, you're all over the news. They're saying you were the one who turned in the recording." "I didn't turn it in," Evelyn said quietly. "I gave it to someone who knew what to do with it." "They're calling you brave," Claire said. "Some are calling you reckless. It doesn't matter what they call me. It's out there now." "And what about Harrison?" Evelyn hesitated. "He's gone. For now." She didn't add that she wasn't sure if he'd stay gone. After the call ended, she went to the nursery. The twins were napping, their small chests rising and falling in the soft afternoon light. The teddy bear sat on the shelf beside the window, patched neatly where she'd sewn the seam back together. Its glass eyes caught the light, reflecting something steady, almost knowing. "You've done your part," she whispered, tracing its paw. "Now let me finish mine." Later that day, she met Margaret Klein at a small cafe downtown. The journalist looked both tired and exhilarated, the way people do when they've just dropped a truth bomb on polite society. "It's spreading fast," Margaret said, stirring her tea. "Not just local press. National outlets are picking it up. People are talking about systemic abuse, class divides, racial power. You started something bigger than him." Evelyn looked down at her cup, the steam curling upward like ghosts. "I didn't start it," she said. "I just refuse to keep quiet about it." "You know they'll come after you," Margaret said. "They'll question your motives, your sanity, your marriage. That's how men like him survive, by turning women like you into footnotes." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then they'll have to write carefully. I intend to make my own ending." Margaret studied her for a moment, then nodded. "If you ever want to go on record your version of events, in your own words, my platform's open to you. Maybe someday," Evelyn said. "But for now, I'd rather let his voice do the talking. It's time the world heard how he sounds when no one's watching." When she returned home, the reporters were still outside, but she ignored them, walking straight through the gate with her head high. The house, though quieter now, felt lighter. The ghosts of silence had begun to fade. That evening, after the twins were asleep, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the fire. The flicker of the flames painted the room in soft gold. She thought about Marcus and his son, about how she needed to find them to make sure they were safe, to tell them that the man who'd tried to destroy their dignity no longer had power. She would help them rebuild, quietly, just as she would rebuild herself. The clock on the mantel chimed 9. A sound at the door startled her, a knock, sharp but not urgent. She hesitated, then opened it. Harrison stood there, his suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I had nowhere else to go," he muttered. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "They've taken everything, my accounts, my name, everything I built." "You built it on fear," she said. "It was never going to last." He looked around the room, his gaze landing on the family portraits. "Do you think this makes you better than me?" "No," she said softly. "Just freer." His voice cracked, the first hint of something almost human. "I loved you, Eve, you know that, don't you? You loved control, she said, and you called it love. He turned toward her, his shoulders sagging. What happens to me now? You face it, she said. Like every man who's ever done wrong and thought he was untouchable. He laughed bitterly. And you? What happens to you? She took a deep breath. I raise our children to be kind, to tell the truth, even when it hurts. And I stop living like the walls are listening. For a moment, the two of them stood there in silence, the firelight flickering between them like a fragile truce. Then he nodded once, as if conceding defeat, and walked out the door for the last time. When the sound of his car faded down the street, Evelyn sank into the armchair, her body trembling with exhaustion but her heart strangely light. The house felt alive again, not perfect, not whole, but honest. She looked toward the stairs, listening for the steady rhythm of her children's sleep, and whispered, "It's over." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the magnolia trees. Somewhere in the darkness, church bells rang a slow, solemn melody that felt like closure. Evelyn closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, knowing that truth had cost her everything. But what it gave back, dignity, freedom, a future for her children, was worth every scar it left behind. The morning after Harrison left for the last time, Evelyn woke to silence, real silence. No footsteps echoing across the marble floor, no clipped tones from the study, no tension humming beneath the air like a hidden wire. For the first time in years, the house breathed. The sunlight spilled through the windows without meeting resistance. She stood in her robe, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, looking out over the garden where magnolia petals had fallen in soft drifts overnight. The world outside was still turning. Inside, everything was beginning again. The news had taken on a life of its own. Harrison Whitmore's name was everywhere, headlines, editorials, the whispered talk of Charleston society. Some painted him as a fallen titan, others as the inevitable product of wealth and arrogance. None of them mentioned her by name, but she could feel the weight of their gaze, the curiosity disguised as sympathy. Claire called again that morning. "They're saying he's left the state," she said. "Gone to Atlanta, maybe farther. He resigned officially this morning." Evelyn listened quietly, stirring her coffee. "Good," she said. "Let him go build a new life somewhere. Truth doesn't follow him." "And you?" Claire asked softly. "What will you do now?" "Live," Evelyn said. "Just live." After the call, she spent the rest of the morning cleaning the nursery, not because it was dirty, but because she needed to reclaim it. Every corner, every small object had carried pieces of memory, some painful, some pure. She folded the twins' blankets, dusted the shelves, and set the teddy bear back in its rightful place between their cribs. Its patched ear gave it a look of quiet wisdom, as though it had seen too much but never judged. "You've earned your rest," she murmured, smiling faintly. The twins toddled nearby, their laughter bright, unburdened. It struck her then how resilient children are, how easily they find joy in the cracks where adults find regret. She envied them that innocence. Around noon, she received a letter delivered by hand. The envelope was thick, the handwriting unmistakably Harrison's. For a moment, she considered throwing it away unread, but curiosity, or perhaps closure, made her break the seal. The letter was short, written in his usual precise script. "Evelyn, you've taken everything from me, but maybe you were right to. I don't expect forgiveness, only understanding. I can't stay in Charleston. The city whispers louder than I can breathe. Take care of them, the twins, the house, yourself. For what it's worth, I did love you once, H.W." She read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. No tears came, no anger either, just a quiet acknowledgement. Love, she thought, had never been enough, not without decency. That afternoon she drove downtown, needing to feel the pulse of life outside the estate. The city looked the same, yet it didn't. People glanced at her longer than usual, whispers following in her wake. Some looks were admiring, some pitying, others sharp with curiosity. She held her head high, walked into a small cafe, and ordered tea. The young barista hesitated for a moment before smiling shyly. "I just wanted to say," she said, "what you did, it mattered. My mom worked for men like him. Nobody ever spoke up." Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest, a fragile mix of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's not easy to speak when the world prefers silence." Maybe now it'll listen, the girl said. Evelyn nodded, though she wasn't sure. The world listened when scandal was loud, but truth often faded once the noise died down. Still, maybe this time would be different. Later, she visited Street, Luke's hospital, where Marcus and his son were still staying for Jalen's treatment. Marcus looked surprised when she appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, standing quickly. "You didn't have to—" "Don't thank me," she said, smiling gently. "I came to see how he's doing." "He's stronger every day," Marcus said. "They say he might go home next week." She looked at the boy, asleep under a thin blanket, his breathing steady and calm. "He looks peaceful," she said. Marcus hesitated. "I heard about Mr. Whitmore, about the recording. People are talking." "Let them talk," she said. "It's time the truth had its own gossip." Marcus smiled faintly. "You did something good, ma'am. Something brave." "I did something necessary," she said. Bravery was just what it cost. They stood in silence for a while, the hospital machines humming softly around them. As she left, Marcus called after her. "You gave my son his father back. I won't forget that." Evelyn smiled, though her eyes stung. "Then let that be enough." The drive home was quiet. The city's old oaks arched overhead, their branches forming dark tunnels of light and shadow. She rolled down the window, letting the humid air wash over her face. The scent of salt from the marsh drifted in, mingled with magnolia and earth. It felt like breathing for the first time. When she reached the house, the twins were waiting by the front door, their little hands pressed to the glass, faces lighting up when they saw her. She scooped them up, kissing their cheeks, their laughter spilling against her neck. In that moment, the world shrank down to what truly mattered: two small hearts, steady and pure. That evening, she stood on the back porch, watching the sunset burn across the horizon. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, the kind of beauty that made endings look like beginnings. She thought of her father again, his hands rough, his voice steady. "When you see wrong, Evelyn, you don't wait for someone braver. You do the right thing, even if your hands shake." Her hands had shaken plenty, but they hadn't failed her. Inside, the house creaked softly, alive again. The faint sound of the twins' laughter drifted down from upstairs, and the scent of fresh-baked cornbread from the kitchen reminded her that life continued even after ruin. She whispered to the empty air, "We're still here." The magnolias swayed gently, as if nodding in agreement. Evelyn turned off the porch light, the last of the day's glow fading behind her. Tomorrow would bring new headlines, new whispers, maybe even new battles. But for tonight, the house was still, her children safe, her conscience clean. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living. A week later, the house no longer felt haunted. It wasn't peace exactly, not yet, but something close enough to let Evelyn breathe again. The air inside was lighter, the rooms less rigid, as if the walls themselves had stopped listening for his footsteps. The staff spoke in normal tones now, laughter echoing faintly from the kitchen in the mornings. Even the twins slept more soundly, free of the tension they'd once sensed without understanding. Every night, Evelyn walked through the quiet halls and realized that freedom doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It simply removes the fear you've grown used to. One morning, as she read the newspaper over breakfast, she saw an article buried near the back page. Former Charleston philanthropist Harrison Whitmore declares bankruptcy, cites personal crisis. The story was small, almost pitiful. The empire that had once made her husband untouchable had dissolved into debt and silence. There was no triumph in reading it, only a strange tenderness. She'd spent years fearing his power, only to learn that power built on cruelty collapses faster than anyone imagines. She folded the paper and set it aside, taking a long sip of her coffee. The nanny came in carrying one of the twins, the child's curls sticking up in every direction. "He's been asking for you all morning," Marjorie said with a smile. Evelyn reached for her son, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "And what's this troublemaker been up to?" The boy giggled, pointing toward the backyard. "Birds." Evelyn looked out the window. The garden was alive with motion, sparrows darting between the magnolia branches, a red cardinal perched boldly on the iron gate. "Yes," she said softly. "Birds, they're free now." After breakfast, she called Marcus. It had been nearly a week since they'd last spoken. "Mrs. Whitmore," he greeted her, his voice warm but cautious. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me." "Don't call me that," she said gently. "Evelyn is fine." He laughed quietly. "All right, Evelyn, I was just calling to tell you they released Jalen from the hospital. He's breathing better, stronger every day." "That's wonderful news," she said. "He deserves a normal life." "So do you," Marcus replied. His tone carried something deeper respect, perhaps gratitude. "I don't know what's next for me, but if you ever need help around the house again, I think," she said with a smile, "you've done more than enough already." After the call, she sat by the window for a long time, watching the children play in the yard. The light on the grass shimmered through the leaves, a soft, forgiving kind of sunlight. For years, she had associated quiet with danger, the hush before his voice, the silence after an argument, but now it had become something sacred. That afternoon, she found herself in the nursery again. The twins had outgrown some of their toys, and she'd decided to pack a few for donation. When she picked up the teddy bear, the familiar weight of it stirred something in her chest. It had been the beginning, and the witness of everything, the night of cruelty, the first spark of courage, the proof that truth could live, even in the smallest places. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the faint line where she'd sewn it shut. "You changed everything," she whispered. "You did what none of us could." The twins toddled in then, their laughter spilling into the room like light. They reached for the bear, and she handed it to them. "Keep it safe," she said. "It knows all our secrets." That evening, she attended a charity meeting downtown, her first public appearance since the scandal. The event was quieter than usual, more intimate. Conversations paused when she entered, then resumed with the polite hum of practiced civility. Claire was there, waiting with a reassuring smile. "You look radiant," she said, hugging her. "People are watching you, you know." "Let them," Evelyn said, returning the smile. "Maybe they'll learn something." As the meeting began, the moderator, a dignified woman with silver hair, addressed the room. "We've all seen what's happened in our city these past weeks. Power abused, trust broken, but we've also seen courage, the kind that doesn't shout, but acts." She looked directly at Evelyn. "We need more of that." The applause was soft but genuine. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm, not from pride, but from relief. It was strange to be seen without pretense, to stand in the same rooms she once entered as someone else's shadow, and finally belong as herself. After the meeting, as she walked through the quiet streets toward her car, the air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine. The city lights reflected on the wet cobblestones, turning them into a ribbon of gold. She thought about everything that had led her here, the lies, the fear, the courage that came only when she had nothing left to lose. Justice hadn't been loud or swift. It had been quiet, patient, like the steady drip of water wearing away stone. When she reached home, the twins were asleep, the teddy bear clutched between them. She stood by their crib for a while, watching the rise and fall of their small chests, the soft innocence of their dreams. "You'll never remember the worst of it," she whispered. "And that's enough for me." Before bed, she stepped out onto the porch again. The sky was clear, 1,000 stars scattered across it like promises. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the faint sound of a train, a reminder that life always moved forward. She wrapped her shawl tighter and closed her eyes. Her father's voice echoed once more in her memory. "The right thing never feels easy, Evelyn, but it always feels clean." She smiled faintly. Clean. That was the word for it. Not victory, not revenge, just clean. The house behind her creaked softly, alive but at peace. She turned back inside, pausing in the doorway to take one last look at the home that had once been a prison and was now simply a place to begin again. Tomorrow she would call Margaret to thank her. She would make plans to rebuild not an empire, not a name, but a life. And when the morning came, she would sit with her children in the garden and tell them a story not of cruelty, but of courage. The kind that starts with a single question and ends with a woman who learned that justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs someone brave enough to listen. The following weeks unfolded like slow waves, each day a little quieter, each morning a little clearer. The Whitmore name, once spoken with reverence, was now a whisper of scandal. Some neighbors crossed the street to avoid her, while others offered silent nods of respect, the kind that said, "I wish I'd had your courage." Evelyn didn't mind either reaction. She had learned that truth made people uncomfortable, and that discomfort was the beginning of change. Her days settled into a gentle rhythm. She woke early, made breakfast with the twins, answered letters from charities and reporters she no longer feared, then took long walks through the garden. The magnolias were in bloom again, their fragrance heavy and forgiving. Each blossom felt like an act of defiance against the ugliness that had once poisoned this house. One morning, a letter arrived, this one with a law firm's seal. She knew before she opened it that it would concern the divorce. Her lawyer had warned her. Harrison was contesting custody, citing her emotional instability and vindictive behavior. The irony almost made her laugh. Instead, she sat at her desk, unfolded the pages, and read the familiar legal phrases that attempted to turn pain into property. He was fighting to keep control even now, from a distance. But this time, she wasn't afraid. That evening, after putting the twins to bed, she called her attorney, a calm, sharp woman named Judith. "He's trying to provoke you," Judith said over the phone. "He wants a reaction. If you let him, he'll make you look volatile." "He already did that once," Evelyn replied. "I won't let him do it again." "Good," Judith said, "because this time, you have something he doesn't: proof and peace. The court favors the parent who protects stability." "Then that's what I'll do," Evelyn said quietly. "I'll protect their peace." Over the next few weeks, she prepared for the custody hearing with quiet determination. She gathered letters from neighbors, nannies, doctors, anyone who could speak to her devotion as a mother. But what she didn't prepare for was the toll it would take emotionally. Each paper she signed felt like a dissection of her past life, every paragraph a mirror showing what she'd endured. Still, she didn't falter. She owed her children more than survival. She owed them truth wrapped in grace. The day of the hearing came with the scent of rain on the air. Charleston's courthouse stood grand and intimidating, its white columns gleaming like judgment. Evelyn arrived in a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she wore not as sentiment, but as a symbol of closure. Harrison was already there when she entered, flanked by his lawyers. He looked thinner, older. His confidence had cracked, replaced by something like weariness. When their eyes met, he gave a faint nod, not of greeting, but recognition, two people acknowledging the end of what had once been a life built on illusion. The proceedings were civil but cold. His lawyers painted her as manipulative, emotionally unstable, someone who'd orchestrated public humiliation. Hers countered with evidence, the recording, witness statements, her years of documented philanthropy. The judge, a stern woman with tired eyes, listened carefully, her gaze moving between them like a pendulum measuring truth. When Harrison took the stand, his voice was steady, practiced. "I only wanted to protect my children from chaos," he said, "from a woman who was unraveling." Evelyn's stomach clenched, but she didn't look away. Then it was her turn. She stood. The courtroom hushed around her. "I didn't expose my husband to humiliate him," she began. "I exposed him because the truth was suffocating this family. I did it for my children to show them that silence can become its own kind of cruelty." The judge studied her. "Do you believe Mr. Whitmore is a danger to them?" Evelyn hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of sorrow. "He's a danger to what they might become if they learn that money can excuse what's wrong," she said softly. "I don't want my children to inherit fear. I want them to inherit peace." The courtroom was silent. Even Harrison didn't move. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was measured. "The court recognizes Mrs. Whitmore as the primary custodian, with Mr. Whitmore granted supervised visitation." Evelyn closed her eyes, a wave of relief and sadness washing through her at once. It wasn't victory, it was balance. The hearing ended quietly. Outside, as she stepped into the rain, Harrison followed her. "You got what you wanted," he said, his tone low. "No," she said, turning to face him. "I got what we all needed: the truth." "Do you hate me, Evelyn?" he asked after a pause. She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "Hate would mean I still care enough to carry you." He flinched, then nodded, almost respectfully. "Goodbye, then." "Goodbye," she said, and meant it. She watched him walk down the courthouse steps, the rain falling harder now, blurring his figure until he vanished into the crowd. When she returned home, the twins were napping, the nanny reading quietly in the corner. The house smelled of fresh bread and lavender soap. She stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the warmth settle into her bones. She realized then that freedom wasn't a single moment, it was a series of choices, each one braver than the last. That night, she wrote in her journal for the first time in years. Today, justice didn't roar, it whispered. It asked me to stand tall when the world wanted me small, and I did. I finally did. She closed the book, her hand resting on the cover, and smiled. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, its familiar chime, now a song of peace instead of dread. The children stirred upstairs, and Evelyn went to check on them. The teddy bear was still tucked between them, its small, stitched smile unbroken. She whispered softly, "We did it." Then she turned off the light, the house settling into the kind of silence that no longer frightened her, the kind that feels like grace. Months passed, and the Whitmore estate, once a gilded prison, had become something else entirely, a home. The walls that once absorbed arguments now held laughter. The garden, once meticulously trimmed by order, bloomed wildly under Evelyn's care, vines curling freely over the old iron fence, as if claiming back a life too long contained. The city had moved on to new scandals, as cities always do. Her name still appeared occasionally in quiet corners of newspapers, mostly in connection to charity work and women's advocacy groups. She didn't care for the attention, but she knew its purpose. If her story gave another woman the courage to step out of fear, then the whispers were worth it. She spent her mornings tending to the twins, their little hands learning to dig in the soil beside her. They grew stronger, more curious, and happier each day. When the sun grew too hot, she took them inside for lemonade, reading them old storybooks her father once read to her. She found herself laughing more easily, breathing more deeply, and sleeping without the old weight pressing against her chest. Yet, in quiet moments, she still thought of Harrison, not with anger, but with a strange kind of pity. Power had been his armor and his undoing, and she'd once been part of that armor. She hoped, wherever he was, that he'd learn to live without it. One evening, while clearing the attic, she came across a box of his old papers, ledgers, speeches, photos of the two of them at charity galas. She almost threw it out, but something stopped her. Instead, she carried it downstairs and sat by the fireplace. The twins were asleep upstairs, and the house was wrapped in the kind of silence that belonged only to the content. She opened the box and leafed through the pieces of a life that no longer existed. In one photo, she was laughing, her hand on his arm, her eyes bright with youth and hope. The image felt like a stranger's memory. She studied it for a long time, then fed it gently into the fire. The edges curled, blackened, and dissolved into ash. "Goodbye," she whispered, not to him, but to the woman she used to be. In the weeks that followed, she began something new. With Margaret's help, she launched a small foundation, one that offered legal and emotional aid to domestic workers and women trapped in abusive power structures. She named it the Magnolia Fund, after the flowers that refused to stop blooming no matter how often they were pruned. The first time she spoke publicly about it, the hall was filled with quiet strength. People came not for spectacle but for truth. Her voice didn't shake as she spoke. It carried the calm conviction of someone who had lived what she was fighting for. "Justice isn't loud," she told the audience. "It's the steady hand that keeps reaching, even when no one's watching. It's the woman who walks away before the world tells her to run." The applause that followed wasn't explosive, it was reverent, like the soft rustle of wind through trees. Afterward, an older woman approached her, eyes brimming. "My daughter worked for men like your husband," she said. "She died before she could leave. Thank you for showing people what happens when someone does." Evelyn took her hands gently. "Thank you for reminding me why I had to." As the months turned to a year, the weight of the past softened into memory. The twins grew taller, their laughter louder, their questions endless. One afternoon, as they played in the garden, Evelyn watched them chase each other under the magnolia tree, petals falling like snow. Marcus stopped by with Jalen, now healthy and full of energy, his eyes bright with life. "This place looks different," Marcus said, glancing around the garden. "Feels lighter." "It is," Evelyn said. "It finally breathes." "You too," he added with a smile. "You breathe different now." She laughed softly. "Maybe I do." They stood watching the children for a while, the sun slanting gold through the trees. "You know," Marcus said, "when all that started I thought it would break us. But it didn't. It just showed us who we really were." "Sometimes," Evelyn said, "the breaking is the beginning." That night, after everyone had gone home and the twins were tucked in bed, Evelyn stepped outside one last time before sleep. The air was warm, filled with the hum of crickets and the distant sound of church bells. She looked up at the stars, remembering her father's words, the ones that had carried her through everything. Do the right thing, even if your hands shake. Her hands didn't shake anymore. She sat on the porch swing, the same one she'd once feared sitting on alone, and let herself sway gently with the night. The world was still imperfect. There were still men like Harrison, still systems built to protect them, but she knew now that courage didn't end. When the story did, it became something you pass on, quietly, to the next soul who needs it. The wind picked up, stirring the magnolia branches. One blossom fell, landing softly beside her, pure white against the dark wood. She picked it up, turning it between her fingers, and smiled. Inside, the grandfather clock struck midnight, its chime no longer a warning, but a song of continuity. She rose, walked back inside, and paused at the foot of the stairs. The teddy bear still sat on the shelf in the hallway, its stitched smile watching over the sleeping house. For a moment, she felt the urge to say thank you to the small object that had unknowingly saved them all, but she didn't need to. The silence said it for her. Upstairs, she kissed her children goodnight, their small hands reaching for hers even in sleep. Then she whispered a promise to them, to herself, to the world beyond the gates of that house. "We are free," she said, "and we will stay that way." Outside, dawn began to gather at the edge of the sky, the first light spilling over the magnolias. It was gentle, golden, and utterly new. Evelyn watched it spread and realized that justice, at its purest, isn't vengeance or noise. It's the quiet assurance that truth, once spoken, can never be silenced again. And in that quiet, she finally found peace.